Paul was ready to pay whatever price to take care of his debt. A great, outstanding example of this we read in 2 Corinthians 11, 23, 28. Let's go ahead and put that up on the screen in the New Living Translation. We'll read it. It really shows what this concept, what this idea of being a debtor meant to Paul. Look at what Paul says here. 2 Corinthians 11, 23, 28. New Living Translation. He says, I have worked harder, been put in prison more often, been whipped times without number, and faced death again and again. 5 different times the Jewish leaders gave me 39 lashes. 3 times I was beaten with rods. I remember when Rick Renner was in our church in California for a seminar, and he touched on this. I'd never thought of before. He said, we read something like that, we don't really stop to think about what it was, but he says when they beat them with rods, he said they would hang them upside down from their ankles and take like metal bars and beat the bottoms of their feet. Can you imagine that? The pain, the swelling, the bruising, and then think about having to walk and it wasn't like, they could ride around in a vehicle, having to walk after having your being beaten with rods. And Paul said 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. Imagine that. Think what it'd be like to be stoned. Sometimes we just read these things and just like, okay, yeah, I don't even like to think about. Can you imagine with no armor on, no defense, having stones hurt you? I mean, one stone is painful enough and can hurt enough, but this was many stones of large size. I mean, brick size or bigger. 3, he says, once I was stoned. And they left him for dead. And then God, I think he may have been dead, quite likely was. And that's when he had the vision where he's caught up to the 3rd heaven. And he said he saw things that are not, that he can't utter, they're not worthy for him to utter. And then God, they gathered around him, they prayed, and God raised him up from the dead, is the way I read it. Hallelujah. So he says, once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. Now, this wasn't he was shipwrecked just because he was taking a cruise. He was shipwrecked because he was taking the gospel. He was on a missionary journey. He was preaching the gospel. Paul didn't have time for cruises. He didn't have time for leisurely strolls to the Mediterranean. He was preaching the gospel. Hallelujah. It says 3 times I was shipwrecked. Once I spent a whole night and day adrift at sea. Think of that. A whole night, a whole day adrift at sea, floating in the Mediterranean Sea. A whole night, a whole day because of the shipwreck, apparently. And he says that happened Why did that happen to Paul? Because he was a debtor. He saw himself as a debtor. And he spent his life endeavoring to pay off his debt to God for saving him, making him a new creation, making him whole, taking him, giving him a whole new life, and delivering him from eternity in hell, a Christless eternity, burning in the flames of hell, and saving his life and destining him for heaven, eternity with the Father. Jesus said, in my Father's house are many dwelling places. I go to prepare a place for you. So Paul said, I'm a debtor to God, and I'm a debtor to humanity for whom Christ died. So he says, after that, he said, I've traveled on many long journeys. Again, these weren't pleasure trips. These weren't vacations. These were journeys to preach the gospel to pay his debt. He said, I have faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have, let's see, he says, I faced danger from rivers and from robbers. I have faced danger from my own people, the Jews, as well as the Gentiles. So he had the religious and non-religious giving him a hard time, a really hard time, as we read. He said, I faced danger in the cities. Well, I said, get out of the city and get out in the country, get out in the deserts. Well, he says, no, I faced danger in the deserts. Well, get out of the land and get on the sea. He says, I faced danger on the seas. I faced danger in the cities, in the deserts, on the seas. I faced danger from men who claim to be believers. Well, then shake the dust off your feet and go to those who aren't believers. And he said, I face dangers from them who are not. Well, leave the unsaved and go to the Christians. I face danger from them too. All because he was a debtor. He said, I've worked hard and long, enduring many sleepless nights. Not because he just couldn't sleep, but for other reasons. I have been hungry and thirsty, and have often gone without food. Why? Because of the gospel's sake, because he was a debtor to all men. He was willing to pay the price. He said, I have shivered in the cold without enough clothing to keep me warm. Then, besides all these, I have the daily burden of my concern for all the churches. We'll continue this tomorrow. Join us then. And don't forget to share this and subscribe on the church YouTube page and hit the notification button. It'll come right to your phone at 5:15 every day. God bless you. Thanks for joining us.